Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the GM, and today we're talking about post crisis Superman. But before we get into it, like, subscribe, and comment. We've got an awesome community here, and it's all thanks to you. Thank you so much for being here. With all that said, let's dive in. The prologue to this one takes place on January 28th of 1986, when Metropolis was all set to cap off the celebrations for its 250th anniversary. Special arrangements had been made to have an experimental space plane called the Constitution land at Metropolis International Airport. Everything seemed to be going perfectly until a small civilian craft somehow slipped through the security cordon, colliding with the space plane, causing both of them to dive out of control. Callahan, the mission commander, tells Kat Grant she came along so she could have a story, and it looks like she's going to get it. Kat says, "Yeah, if I survive." Just then, Clark Kent Jr. flies in and grabs the plane. Unlike his father, who used to have 50 APs of strength, Clark Jr. only has 25 APs because his mother is Lois Lane. So being only half Kryptonian means he's only half as strong, which means saving this enormous space plane is going to be a challenge. Clark Jr. positions himself at the rear of the plane and grabs the tail fin, only for it to rip off and hit him in the face. He says, "Nice one, Clark," then flies after the plane as it continues to dive. He flies in front of it and grabs the nose of the plane, pushing back against it, and ripples go through the hull as the crew tumbles forward inside. Clark crawls under the plane a bit more and pushes up, finally getting the leverage he needs until at last he gets the wingless plane down on the runway. It rips up the pavement, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. An inflatable rubber slide is deployed, and people deboard the crashed aircraft. Cat Grant runs over to him to interview him, and then everyone else runs over too, and everyone has either questions or demands. They all want him to sell something of theirs or date them, and it just all overwhelms Clark. So for now, the new Superman flies away. Everyone with a camera takes a photo, and everyone with a camcorder videotapes him. He goes back to Smallville, Kansas, to the Kent farm where his parents, Lois and Clark Sr., live. Clark Jr. tells his dad what happened, and his dad feels bad that he can't do the job anymore. But during the recent crisis on Infinite Earths, the original Superman was exposed to gold kryptonite along with several of his other kids. Clark Jr. was spared because he was elsewhere at the time. As the pre crisis Superman gives the post crisis Superman some words of encouragement, Clark Jr. interrupts, telling his dad that he doesn't know how hard it is because his dad was fully Kryptonian. For Clark Jr., trying to do the same job with half as much power is going to be incredibly hard. Which brings us to the main plot of today's game session. Alexander Luthor Jr. is watching a VCR tape of Superman at the airport when Kat Grant walks into his office at LexCorp. She comments that this new Superman saved the plane, but Alexander reads off how many pieces were broken and how much it's going to cost him to repair it all. Kat says she's sure this new Superman did his best, and Alexander says that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Then he asks if the reason Kat came over was to have dinner with him. But Kat Grant said she came to ask him about a recent military contract, a suit of power armor that was stolen. Alexander seems disappointed that Kat came for business, not pleasure. And he shows her a small model of the power armor, and it's a dumbed down version of his father's Lexor battlesuit. They talk a little bit about the planet Lexor, and Kat asks why Alexander Luthor Jr. doesn't still live there with his mom. And Alexander reminds her that he was brought to Earth during the recent crisis and he helped save the world, which, by the way, is one reason why people accept him as a hero despite his name and his family's legacy. Anyways, so Cat Grant suggests that the theft of the battlesuit could be a silver lining in Luthor's pocket. Now that terrorists have the prototype, the Pentagon will undoubtedly want LexCorp to build them a bigger, better version. When all is said and done, this could net Alexander a multi-billion-dollar windfall. Alexander says it almost sounds like she's suggesting that he should be happy that his property was stolen. Then his personal assistant, Mercy Graves, tells him he's late for an appointment. So he apologizes to Kat and says that's all the time he has for her today. Kat returns to WGBS, where her boss, Morgan Edge, tells her she's fired. Kat asks if Luthor called Edge, and Edge says she can't just go around making accusations like that, and that he's lucky LexCorp isn't going to sue WGBS. So Kat goes job hunting and eventually finds herself at the Daily Planet in the office of its editor-in-chief, James Olsen. Jim interviews her and tells her how he started when he was just a kid in the 1930s with a paper route. Then in the 40s, he became a photographer. And over the years, he paid his dues, and now he's the editor-in-chief. Pat Grant does the math and realizes that Jim Olsen is 67 years old. He asks why he doesn't retire, and he says that as long as he can do the job, he will do the job. And he says that he thinks she's got what it takes to do the job too. So Olsen hires her and introduces her to Clark Kent Jr. and Ron Troop, who Jim refers to as his star reporters. Clark shakes Kat's hand and says it's nice to meet her. And despite the glasses, Kat thinks that Clark is a hunk, so she turns up the sex appeal. Kat asks Clark if he has plans for the evening, and he says that Alexander Luthor is hosting a dinner party on the world's biggest yacht. So he asks if Kat wants to be his plus one, and she accepts. So evening rolls around and the dinner party begins. Alexander Luthor greets Clark and Kat, and the tension between Alex and Kat is obvious. So Kat tells him it's his fault she lost her job. Luthor suggests it's her own fault for being so unprofessional. Kat says unprofessional, but just then, terrorists hijack the yacht. There are several men in camo wielding machine guns, and their leader is Roger Corbin, the younger brother of John Corbin, aka Metallo. And as one might expect, Roger is wearing LexCorp's stolen battlesuit. Clark gets between the men and Kat and defends her. So one of the men hits Clark over the head with the butt of his gun, then throws Clark overboard as Kat screams. The men then go to shoot Cat Grant, but at the last possible second, the new Superman gets between her and them using his super speed. This is when we rolled initiative. Superman is the fastest out of everybody here, and just getting into position counts as an automatic action. So on Clark's remaining dice action, he multi-attacks their guns using heat vision. Post-crisis Superman has 15 APs of heat vision. The guns have a body of 4. Clark rolls an 8 and a 9, which is normally 2 column shifts. But when we adjust for the multi-attack penalty, it means that each gun only takes 11 points of damage. -4 would be quote unquote death for a gun. So each gun glows red hot and then melts. And the hijackers, of course, yell and let go of the hot guns. On Alexander Luthor's turn, he offers to hire Superman to work for him. But Superman says his services are not for hire, and that was Superman's last automatic action. Their conversation is interrupted when Roger Corbin shoots Superman with the Gatling gun mounted on the battlesuit's right arm. By the way, for the battlesuit, we started with the first edition DC Heroes post Lexor battlesuit from page 34 of the Superman sourcebook. And then we cut the numbers in half. So the battlesuit now, the one we have in this adventure, has a dexterity of 10, a strength of 20, and a body of 18, allowing it to fight post-crisis Superman the way we wanted it to. Anyways, so for that gun, we took the 37 APs of energy blast that the original Lexor armor had, and we cut that number in half. And so now what we're doing is we have 18 APs of projectile weapons. So Corbin needs to roll a 9 or better to hit, and he rolls a 9 and a 5, earning 1 column shift. Then it's that 18 APs versus Clark's body of 18. So Corbin does 6 points of damage to Clark. And the force of that gun, by the way, versus Superman's weight does knockback damage. So Superman is thrown further back into the ship. Then Corbin turns to Cat Grant and says, "So long, sweetheart." But he doesn't have a dice action left. So he's threatening to shoot her, but he can't shoot her on this turn. So on Superman's turn, he uses his super speed to grab Miss Grant, and then he flies Cat to land. And Corbin follows using the suit's flight power. When Corbin lands, he smashes a crate on the docks. Superman hears this with extended hearing and directional hearing, so he then goes to where Corbin is, then tries to grab the suit, which is Clark's dexterity of 15 versus the suit's dexterity of 10. So Clark needs a 7 or better, and he rolls a 2 and a 9. So he lifts the suit over his head. On Corbin's turn, he then electrifies the suit, electrocuting Superman. Corbin only rolls a 1 and a 4, though. Superman then tries to break the suit, and he rolls a 5 and a 6, doing 12 points of damage to it. On Corbin's turn, he shoots Superman with a different weapon. It's like a tank shell, and it knocks Superman into a construction site where it then explodes. Corbin rolls an 8 and a 2, and Superman takes an additional 4 points of damage. As Superman walks out of the flames of the explosion, Corbin then fires the Gatling gun again, but he rolls a 1 and a 4, which is a miss. So Superman throws a cement truck at him, which hits, doing another 12 points of damage. So the mech is now offline. And Superman then rips the gun arm off of the mech, just in case it could somehow get up and keep going. And then he rips the armor apart piece by piece as it sparks. He pulls Corbin out and asks him if he'd like to go a few rounds without the suit. Corbin passes out, and Superman turns him over to the authorities. Cat Grant calls Mr. Olson and tells him to stop the presses. And the headline on the Daily Planet reads, "Terrorist Captured by Superman," which brings us to the epilogue. Alexander Luthor is in a meeting with a man who had paid for the battlesuit. Since it's been destroyed, he wants a full refund. Luthor says the suit was no longer in his possession when it was destroyed, and he doesn't want to eat $1 billion loss. The man looks over Luthor's shoulder out the window and says, I think you've got bigger problems. Then he excuses himself, and Alexander Luthor Jr. turns around and sees Superman floating there watching him. Luthor rolls the window down and tells Superman he's made a mistake, a big mistake. Luthor says he owns Metropolis. The technology of Lexor rebuilt Metropolis after the crisis, and nearly 2/3 of its people work for Luthor. He saved them. And now they've forgotten that. They look at Superman with his costume and his flashy superhuman powers, and they've forgotten who they owe their lives to. Superman says, I'll be watching you, Luthor. Then he flies away into the night. And that was it for that game session. For this one, we drew inspiration from John Byrne's Man of Steel comics, the pilot to Superman, the animated series, and the airplane scene from Superman Returns. And I think it went pretty well. Interestingly enough, we always referenced the idea that the post-crisis Superman did this sort of thing, but we always treated it like a player handout. We never actually played it until now. So we liked this one, and hopefully you did too. So from all of us here at the longest running superhero RPG on Earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure.